Hi, I'm Dr. Sora Jabitsky, and this is my first podcast, courtesy of my student.
Hello, my name is Carolina Freire. I can go by Caro, and I'm a student at Florida International University. I'm studying psychology.
And I'm a teacher at Florida International University. And I've been studying the psychology of sexual behavior and teaching the psychology of sexual behavior for 18 going on 19 years. During that time, I have observed the culture. And culture is a big part of what I discuss in my classes because sex by itself is really nothing. It's the meaning we give it. Unfortunately, a lot of the meaning we give it is negative. And yet, sexuality is the core of who we are. We wouldn't be here if our parents hadn't done it. And their parents before them, and their parents before them, and their parents before them. So what I like to bring to the whole discussion about sexuality is its relevance to everyday life and the idea that sex is normal. We were born to reproduce. We have the mechanisms to reproduce. We may choose not to use those mechanisms, but also sex is sacred. And what I mean by sex is sacred is you're with another person, even with you more than one, which we'll get into sometime in the future. But if you're with a person, how do you want to treat this person? Who is this person? Are you objectifying this person? Or are you treating this person as if they were a sacred human being? You know, we separate the spiritual from the religious, and yet how many people at the height of orgasm scream, "Oh God."
So today we're going to cover a couple questions going on the definitions of love and different questions based on sex that Dr. Sora will be answering for us today. So our first question is going to be defining what love is.
I call love a state of being, but I will read from some notes. As I was saying to Carl, it's a state of being. It's a piece of who we are. I'm a student of A Course in Miracles, and of course that teaching influences your original nature. Is love, is innocence, is play, it's kindness. And yet somehow that gets eroded in a romantic love. I hate to say minimize romantic love, but to a certain extent, you know, it's based on hormones. Psychologist Helen Fisher talked about this when she talked about the primary neurotransmitter / hormones involved in sexuality and love and courtship are testosterone, dopamine, and oxytocin. And testosterone is the hunting neurotransmitter. Make sure, you know, it's like when we want to go looking for a mate. And dopamine is that addictive drive. It makes us, you know, want to possess someone. We get a hit when we're in love. I mean, one of the reasons there's less demonstration of love now, following that reasoning, is because so many other substances and devices are using up that dopamine. So love gets relegated to the back because you don't need it anymore. You're getting your hits of dopamine somewhere else. You know, the last hormone / neurotransmitter is oxytocin, you know, the cuddle hormone. So you could say, what is love? Well, we could talk about, you know, hits of dopamine, you know, the drive to reproduce, cuddling. But if you want long-lasting love, then I go to what I heard a comedian say, and the comedian said, like, would you, you know, it sounds gross, but would you wipe? Meaning, if that person who's gorgeous and voluptuous and handsome and statuesque, if that person is that right now, would you still love them? When, you know, the Beatles sang it, will you still love me, will you still need me when you're 64? I'm older than that. But, you know, that, you know, there's, again, so many ways to define love. I look at real love, having been married as long as I've been married. You know, I look at real love as, you know, can you accept the worst parts of your partner and love those parts? Can you accept those parts that aren't so perfect? Some of the exercises I used to do with my husband, what I see in you that I haven't forgiven in myself that's a process. Or I forgive you for not being who I want you to be. Sandra Ray, philosopher, writer, speaker, used to say love brings up anything unlike itself. Space of love, we can, like, all our crazies can come out, and with the intention of, will you love me despite all this? Let's go on to some other questions.
Yeah, of course. I think the following question goes into what you were talking about as in love, and I think that love and intimacy go hand in hand. This question is sex seen as more of a performance now in society rather than intimacy, as in missing components such as intimacy or love when people have sex?
Based on what you said at the beginning of that, it seems that sex has become more of a performance. Look at any of these male enhancement products.
Yeah.
It's all about the erection. And, a guy coming into the office the next day and say, oh, my wife thought I was a rock star. Why, I had an erection for the first time in 50, in a number of years. But it's not all about the erection. The women I speak to, the women I know, what they really are craving is the cuddling, is the holding, is the being able to be open and vulnerable, to allow themselves to freely let go. I mean, that's the intimacy part, the tender part. And sex doesn't have to be tender all the time. I mean, people role play, people play games. The way you can get to those things is by allowing the inner to come out, and not be afraid, and to be able to trust. So intimacy is based on trust, and those, women who are with those guys who have the hard on as a result of this medication, if that satisfies you, wonderful. In the long run, there would be something missing, and that something missing is real intimacy. And intimacy is based on trust and openness. If that's coming through with the use of that medication, wonderful. But that's not what they stress. The ads stress the physical connection, but there's also an emotional connection as well, and that they don't talk about.
That was a great definition for that. I think the following question would be, is sex considered normal or sacred?
It's both. Sex is normal for some of the reasons I just mentioned. We're programmed to reproduce. We have, the hypothalamus, which regulates, feeding, fighting, fleeing, and I call it making love, the 4 Fs. Some of you might have learned about the 4 Fs in high school biology. And these are guaranteed for survival. Making love is for survival of the species.
Right, reproduction.
Procreation, reproduction. You can't. So far, we are not using frozen embryos for all babies yet. The way you have a baby is through copulation. That's the old-fashioned way of doing it. I read an article once about a same-sex couple. She identified as a lesbian. He identified as a trans woman. He was on hormone, or she, so they both considered themselves women. So the trans woman, was on hormones, and then the two of them decided they wanted to have babies. The trans woman had stopped taking the hormones, and what they said, they were going to have a baby the old-fashioned way. But copulation is normal. It's the old-fashioned way, but it's how we reproduce. Sacred is, how do you want to regard the partner? One of my thoughts or inventions or ideas has to do with these principles of transcendence and different levels of lovemaking. And at the bottom, it's like a ladder, and at the bottom of the ladder, there's abuse, empty, and then ordinary. These are levels of sex. Those 3 levels are the objectification of a partner. One of the examples I always use is the movie The Color Purple. The first Color Purple with Whoopi Goldberg and Danny Glover. There are scenes where, they have sex and there's no love at all between them. This was an arranged marriage. And the way Whoopi Goldberg described it, talking to someone else talking to another woman was that it was like he was going to the bathroom on her. That's the objectification of a partner. So sex is sacred when you look at your partner and you say, this is the beloved. This is my representation of God on earth. That's an Eastern perspective. How do I want to treat this person? Do I want to treat them like royalty? Or do I want to just treat them to meet my own needs? You know, that's objectification. It's like you might as well be with a robot if you're going to objectify someone. But the real talk about love making, that's sacred.
Jumped right into what I was going to ask you about, the ladder of sexual experience.
Oh, yes.
I went over that in your Substack article, and you mentioned like those 3 steps that you're talking about. And I think it's important to pinpoint where you are there, because if you don't know how you feel within sex with your partner, it's difficult to be able to understand if you're actually feeling pleasure, which leads me to ask you about how you feel towards people feeling beyond pleasure, but towards essence.
So let's start with what the higher levels of this ladder are. People can have different experiences having sex. Some of that came from this 2007 big research paper that said there's 237 reasons people have sex. Not all of them had anything to do with love. Some were like revenge or mate guarding or wanted a job. In other words, love could be, or love making or sex can have multiple purposes. So what occurred to me is, sex was like a ladder. And sometimes as soon as I mention, these labels, I see women especially going, yeah, okay. Yeah, I understand. Then we have ordinary sex, and those are kind of the 3 bottom levels. Ordinary is, it's okay. You roll over, go to sleep. Mike Myers used to say, no big whoop. Abusive is just that. Somebody wants to take advantage of you, wants to either hurt you physically or psychologically. Empty sex is also, it's that objectification that I mentioned before. Then once you go a little bit further up on the ladder, you can start opening up to erotica. And my Substack this week talks about that. And erotica is opening up to sensual experience. Once you start opening up to sensual experience, meaning it stops being just about the penis and the vagina, and it starts opening to, sensation and music and flowers and, good food, wine, and how you're treating the body, experiencing, you're focused on pleasure and pleasuring your partner. So once you move past erotica and you experience that, then you get into lovemaking, and in lovemaking, the focus becomes on your partner. Once you get into lovemaking, then, it's like with each rung, you're feeling more open. The next rung is passion. You're letting loose. Your body is starting to kind of be its own thing. And then at the top of the ladder is this idea of transcendence. And transcendence is that experience of dissolution of the body. It's the experience where people shout, "Oh God." And it's in Catholicism, there's a term, unio mystica, where 2 become one flesh. And that's a mystical experience. It's a dissolution of boundaries. Like you're one with the universe, you're one with your partner. That still seems to be a rare experience, or that is a possible experience to have. And I think that's the experience people really want, but they don't know quite how to get there. The purpose of pleasure is to be able to carry that forth into the world, how to become a kinder, nicer person. I shared a story before about someone I know who at age like late 70s found a boyfriend. She was really happy and he was really good to her, and they had a beautiful relationship. She became a kinder, nicer person. That's what I mean by, pleasure to essence. At our essence, I wholeheartedly know we are spiritual beings. We are meant to be kind. We are meant to be loving. I'm a student of A Course in Miracles, and these are Course teachings, but things I've personally experienced. So essence is who we are. In Buddhism, they talk about original nature, and our original nature is love. So if we can experience pleasure and openness and fulfillment in lovemaking, we can carry that out and just be, that can make us more open, loving, happier people. So everybody needs to go out and have happy sex. Kidding.
Not kidding.
But more for, to have it be a fulfilling experience, so you could take that fulfillment. We were talking about this before. I'm a widow now, and I still feel so full from the love that I shared with my husband of blessed memory.
Which is really great. I applaud you for being strong about that. I wanted to go into this question, which is more based on the topic of sex, since we were talking about it. Where do you think the guilt and the shame comes from in sex?
Okay, so my favorite theory about this is called terror management theory. It's been floating around since the late 1980s. What it talks about is that at the core human fear is fear of death. So what does that have to do with sex? When people have sex, they act like any other mammal, like animals. There's a comedian named Bill Engvall who once told a joke about he and his wife were making love one night, and they had candles up on the bedpost. And the way he described it, it's like it was really hot sex, and he was rooting around like a pig, seeing animals, and they were going at it so hard and furiously they set the bed on fire. That was the joke. But that idea that when we are fornicating, when we are having sex, we are behaving like any other animal. But like any other animal, that means we are subject to die. So all the guilt and the shame is not based on the sex act itself. It's based on equating ourselves with animals. Human beings like to think themselves above the animals. We're so, religious, or, we're pious, or we're smart, or we're, whatever we are above the animals. Well, you're not when it comes to reproduction. So a real fear in sex is fear of death. Now you can also throw in your, religion. For society to have been developed, Sigmund Freud says that civilization is the sublimation of libido. According to Sigmund Freud, this life force can gear us towards love and growth and expansion, or it can gear us towards death. So it's a similar idea about, and inner energy can make us want to die. And the sublimation of this energy, we build all of these structures because the thought, sublimation means that you're taking unacceptable thoughts, channeling them in acceptable directions. Sublimation. So I always find it funny to look at some of our edifices, like the Washington Monument. What does that look like? It's a sublimation of sexuality. So, those are two good reasons why people feel that guilt and shame. And in a way, if we are truly making love, there is a heart opening. There's an expansion of the sense of self. There is no shame and guilt if we are misusing that energy. And by misusing it, I mean those lower three areas. If we, abusing someone or objectifying someone, feel bad because you're treating someone unkindly.
Yeah, that goes along with what you told me earlier in a discussion we had about how the tissues in the vagina are like the tissues in the heart.
Yeah, Stephen Levine writes about that. The tissues in the vagina is the same as the tissue in the heart.
Yeah.
So that when we're open down there, our hearts are open. And I think that's one, when we just focus on the penis and commercials about the penis, I'm laughing. You're like, oh, I performed well last night. Yeah, here's your score. You got 0. You got what, 9, 10. You're like holding up cue cards or
America's
score
Got
cards.
Talent.
Yeah, right, right.
I wanted to ask you about the distinguishment between feeling love and lust, which I think goes along with what you had mentioned about touching up on rape. When you open up yourself to someone, I feel like that's more of a feeling of lust, but obviously in a very unkind way from the rapist's perspective. What's really the main difference between when you have sex feeling love as the main component versus when you feel lust?
So this was a story I wrote several years ago, and it starts out saying a friend confided in me that she finally realized that the warm, tingling sensation she felt between her legs wasn't love. I laughed and thought about all the times when I was young. I felt that sensation. I thought I was in love. So that tingling sensation goes back to those hormones I was talking, or neurotransmitters I was talking about earlier, Helen Fisher. Testosterone, dopamine, oxytocin, that initial excitement, but the initial excitement wears off. At most, a dopamine rush lasts in a relationship, that feeling of I gotta have it, I need that person, that addictive drive lasts at most 2 to 4 years. And unless something else takes over after 2 to 4 years, if someone thinks that's love, that relationship is going to dissolve if something else doesn't take over. So what I've written is real love goes beyond biology. Real love is based on trust and intimacy. Intimacy means seeing the other's warts and pimples. When we're in love, we're attracted to the great bits, the beautiful bits. But what happens if the beautiful bits dissolve? What happens if they go away? What happens if someone gets sick? And I was married 37 years. During that time, romantic love is not enough to hold you together. It's that commitment you've made to partner on a path of self-discovery. You've made a commitment to each other, and I want to say and to God. When I was married, and now I think about a relationship as being triangulated to God or spirit or some higher purpose. If something goes wrong in a relationship, you seek that first. You seek what is the higher purpose, and you go, or a higher self. There's all kinds of words people use for that now. Real love is based on friendship. It's seeing the other's needs as your own. It's also knowing that neither of you is the source of your happiness, is internal, and then you can express that out into the world and into the relationship.
I think my next question would be, in short, because you did go over the distinction of what love feels like, but do you believe that love is a feeling, a choice, or an action?
I think love is a state of being. There's 2 states of being within us. Course in Miracles philosophy, which I accept. I've been studying, practicing for about 45 years. There are 2 parts to us, ego and spirit. And it's the spirit part that is love. And sometimes the Course talks about it like a little child. Like there's this little child within you. Some therapists do inner child work, to bring up where was that inner spark crushed. So the loving part of us is who we really are. In Buddhism, they talk about original nature. In Hinduism, they talk about the beloved. I like the term, essential nature. You mentioned what is essence before. Essence is on my Substack page. Is that original nature, is that core of who we are, who we came into this world to be, pure love. So, and when we act from that, then it's an action. So it's more than feeling, and I'm saying it's who we are. I call love is integrity. Being in a state of love is integrity. Why? Because your every thought, every word, every deed, every feeling is coming from core self. You're not out of alignment. You're not hiding anything. You're telling the truth from the deepest core of your being. And sometimes uncovering or getting to that core means going through a lot of layers that has been built up over the course of our lifetimes that helped us get away, get around in this world. But it masks who we really are as an essence of pure love.
How does self-love and self-awareness affect the capacity for us to love?
Self-love and self-awareness are knowing who you are, not being dependent on someone else to feed you that love. You know what you want. Without self-love, you're coming from neediness. And neediness is also not attractive. And it's like you're never full. And I mentioned this before, use that word. You're never full. When you know who you are, when you're standing in your own truth, when you're standing in your own spiritual identity, then there's nothing to need. You don't feel empty. You don't need to take anything in from the outside. Even in the context of relationships, you know how you want to be treated. You wouldn't settle for abuse unless it's something like 50 Shades of Grey and that was consensual. Consensual stuff, hey, go for it. No judgment here. Some people like abuse. Well, it's like 50 Shades of Grey. That's what that whole book was about, the whole series. But if you don't, you don't need to be anything other than who you are. And I think that's what wholeness is. People who are comfortable in their own skin. In relationship, they're not taking anything from the other. They can actually give, and there could be a give and take for some things.
Yeah. No, I definitely see what you mean there. When you're in a relationship, it's important to not only offer, but to receive as well. So
oh, yeah. Yes.
It goes into the love aspect of it.
Yeah.
But I just have one last question for you today. What are some things that make a sexual relationship healthy and fulfilling over time?
Communication, experimentation. One of the things I'm going to be doing with the book I'm working on is have several practices, 4 basic practices. Intention, breathing, visualization, and sensate focus. Intention is before you get into bed or before you do whatever you're going to do, what do you want to have happen? Breathing, there are breathing exercises that will help achieve orgasm. There's visualizations that will relax you to, again, help you achieve orgasm. And then there's this sensate focus, focusing on the 5 senses. Drinking, eating, so that, tasting. What are you smelling? What are you hearing? Do you have music on? Touch, pleasure. What kind of room are you in? What is the lighting like? Are you wearing special clothing? Put sex time into special time. Make time for novelty. So dopamine, I mentioned before, that's this addictive neurotransmitter. Now, dopamine is released in anticipation of an event. So if you're playing video game, you get the shot of dopamine when you're anticipating getting that hit. So in sex, if you can, what would be happening with people, that the novelty wears off. They're not getting that shot of dopamine anymore. So whatever you can do to increase the novelty You try different things, promote that dopamine getting anticipation of something new. Whatever that is, like blindfold one another. So, you got the idea.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that you did a great job. I just wanted to announce before we end this video that we have the Substack that Dr. Suara has been working on for years now, linked in our channel, so you can read up more about her writing. Thank you for watching.
Thank you. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you.